Hi, my name is David, and today I would like to show you how to replace a fuse box in the engine bay of a Toyota Land Cruiser 105 series. The problem that I had with my fuse box is that it snapped off from its mounts, little feet, because we went through the Simpson Desert and there was kind of a lot of corrugation. So that snapped off, and I thought it was a good opportunity to replace it now with a replacement fuse box. I also used the opportunity to upgrade the engine bay a little bit in terms of rust treatment and painting it out. So that's why all the parts are done. That's a project that is going on. What I recommend before you start a job, if you know your fuse box has a problem and you want to replace it, get the replacement fuse box first from a wreckers, or buy a new one from your car dealer or from the manufacturer, and then really take time to look at it really thoroughly. Take it apart, don't push anything too hard, just go step by step, familiarize yourself with the fuse box and with everything that is in there to make sure that you really have a good understanding of what it is all about, where each cable goes in and out, what the purpose is, and how you mount it and how you take it off. Now I have already taken out the fuse box, and what I'm going to do is to put it back in. So when we take it out, all the tips and what I'm going to talk about is pretty much covered, because it's just the reverse process, and to take it out is actually much more straightforward than putting it back in. Before you start doing anything with the fuse box, make sure you're taking you're cutting off any power supply, and so pretty much disconnect the auxiliary battery. I left that in because I didn't use the space. Disconnect the main battery if you have a dual battery system, and don't forget to also unplug any other power sources such as a solar panel. You have to take out the battery, otherwise you don't have enough space to reach all the cables in the fuse box. When you have made sure that everything is disconnected, then you have to connect the plus and minus of the batteries with whatever you want to use. For example, just use the cable tie to get them together to make sure that there's nothing that can cause any damage to your system. So as you can see here, some of the cables, they go into the fuse box with a plug, and you can totally take them off, whereas others, they come from one end, they have a plug. You could take that off if you wanted to, but if it's not in the space, then you can leave it on, and that goes into the car again. And for example, this thick wire here that comes from somewhere, I don't actually really know, it goes into the fuse box, and is mounted to all these fuses, and then it is connected to the other end that goes out there. So there is cables when you replace the fuse box that you not necessarily even have to take off. So keep that in mind. It's not everything has to come off. It's just to find out which pieces that you have to unmount, that you can take off the actual fuse box assembly. What I did is I just got a replacement fuse box. That's actually the old one, and this one is the replacement. And I've just taken it apart step by step, really slowly, until I really knew where everything is going. And my main tip here is don't push too hard. Everything has to come out smoothly. So in the process of taking out the fuse box, you have a lid on top of this that you can take off, and there's another lid that goes on from the bottom. So in the engine bay, the fuse box is held up by 4 bolts. One is here on the left, one is at the front, well, inside of the engine bay, one is mounted on the right, and the fourth is the one that connects or bolts into the side of the engine bay. When you prepare the fuse box that you want to put into the car, then make sure that you're in the preparation phase, really put in all the fuses at the right side and the right position. You can also see those, how they're supposed to be mounted in the lid of the fuse box. But in my case, somebody who had the car before, they added further fuses, so you can't only rely on what is in the fuse box lid displayed. Just make sure that you really have exactly the same amp fuse in the right position. So these are all the cables that came with the replacement fuse box from another car. I got that for, I don't know, $165 from the wreckers. I think I could have gotten a little bit cheaper price, but it was just difficult to get in the area, so I decided just to go with that price. On the side here you see pretty much of a gap, but that's actually part of the cable setup that is mounted to the car. And this one is the unit that goes into this mount here. And you see two little bolts that go in there, two little screws that you have to mount. And just make sure that you're using the right tool, because I think they were numerical rather than metric. The two little bolts, they look like that, and it's really easy to break them. It is not a 7/64, it's a 3. So when you undo these bolts, then you can shift this unit within the box to release it. And it's pretty much mounted like that in the box. And you see here there is different relays and units still installed. That relay on the right, the black one, you have to take off, and that's pretty simple. You just use pliers and wiggle it out, because otherwise this is in the way. So to demonstrate this, as I said before, this part is the one that slides out. You see it here, these two bolts, they're not aligned with each other because I've already unmounted it. If it's properly mounted, you slide it downwards so that it hooks up to these little hooks that they are mounted around this frame. And when you take those out, you're able to move this pretty much this direction, which unhooks it, and then you can wiggle it out. So you slide it to the bottom, and then you take the unit out. Then you have a few other plugs that go in there. You have two of those that are mounted on here, and there's pretty much only one way of installing those. There's a bolt at the top that you have to unscrew, and then you can just wiggle it out. So you have those two, and then you have two more plugs. They're here. I'm ready now to put everything back in. You can see another view of the cables. These are actually the car mounted cables, so you don't even take them out. They're all pretty much just like plugs that you use and unplug, and they stay in the car. So what I mentioned before, you have these two plugs. I just put a tag on that I know which comes from which side to make it easier to put it back in. One plug of the outside, one of the inside of the fuse box. Then you have the unit beside that you slide in and put back with the bolts. And then you have two more plugs, this one and this double plug. And so you see, you can't really do anything wrong. So there's only one way to put it in, and that really helps to not make a mistake. The only cable that you have to unmount here in the fuse box is this yellow one. That just you just poke in a little screwdriver on the one side to release the mechanism, and then you can take them out. Before you're putting the new fuse box in, I would also recommend wrapping the cables with some electrical tape. Okay, so what we do first is to plug these yellow ends back together. And also here, the design of this connector prevents you from doing anything wrong. There's only one way that you can stick it together. And you see that this little clip is going to go back in place, and then you lock it in. So if you're confused which one of these white square plugs is on the front and on the inside, the one that has this yellow switch on is towards the front of the engine bay, so more mounted to the left front side of the car, whereas the other one is more closer to the engine. Now you take your new fuse box and you first put in this unit because that's the most bulky one. The other plugs, they're all kind of easy to mount around, but you have to get this one quite properly in the spot. So do that first. So I got the black unit back in. What I did is to push it in from the bottom up, and then you have to make sure it's really all the way up to as far as I can go on either side. It's what you can see here. It's pretty much then level with the other bits and of the unit, and then you slide it that way. You see a little hook here that is shifting to the other side. That gives a little click, so you know it's properly mounted in place, and then you put the bolts back in. Now let's make sure we put this Toyota relay back in place. That's the one that is mounted at the very top end here. You have to take that away. You have to take it out. Otherwise, if you want to take the unit out because you have to slide up, you can't get it through because of the wall here. And also the other way around, you have to take it away. Otherwise, you don't get it in. So then just put that back into place right away. And like with other fuses, there's only one way to put it in. That goes like that. And you plug it back in, and that's all done. Then you continue on with the other plugs, and that's really difficult to demonstrate because it's actually underneath, so you have to lift up your fuse box, hold it in one way with one hand and put it in from the bottom. So there's the two plugs at the front and the white plugs pretty much in the middle. To tighten these bolts on these two white squared plugs, you use a 10mm spanner or something just to make sure you're getting under there. Now when you tighten these bolts, make sure you not over tighten them. There's not resistance like in another bolt where it stops, you don't feel that. Just go tight but firm, but I think you don't have to go too hard on them. And finally, you want to mount this yellow plug back into the top of the fuse box. That's tricky to show. So it's mounted from underneath. You just have to find the right spot where it goes in. There's a little hole where it plugs in. That plastic, that white plastic plug. So now that the fuse box is back in and all the connectors are back in place, we have to put the bottom lid back on. So that just slides underneath, and you see that there is different holes and openings that match where the cable come in and out. Now I'm not sure if that's the proper way to do it, but I have had these clamps mounted to the fuse box before, just cable ties, just to keep the cable nicely in place, because that's where it comes out of the fuse box. And so there is a position here at the front, one here at the rear, and one on the other side where you can really mount the cables properly to the fuse box. I just did that. Maybe there is a more professional way of doing it, but it worked out in the past, so I just do that again. Now that's the fuse box mounted back into the engine bay. There's little clips that you can attach the cables on both sides. Here on the left hand side of the fuse box, it's pretty much mounted on the fuse box itself, whereas that one can be mounted onto the car, to the chassis. Make sure that you check again the correct position of all the fuses, that everything is in place. Also double check with the specifications in the lid. So that part is done, and you can put the lid back on. So I have put the batteries all back on and now ready to start up the engine. But before we're going to do that, we're actually having to take into consideration that we have to reset the car, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So now what you do, now that everything is back in place, the batteries are reconnected, and everything should be ready to start up the engine. So what you do is you're going to the first position with the key, and just leave it there for 12 seconds and make sure it's really accurate. So I'm going to do that now. And for 12 seconds you go back into the off position. and now you're starting the engine. I have to glow first. I haven't driven the car for like a couple of days. So I pretty much do that 3 times, but that has nothing to do with the Fusebox. Alright, so I'm ready to go. So now I only got the seatbelt light that is illuminated and the handbrake, but that's all good. So it all worked well. So that's how you change the Fusebox. It worked all out well and without a problem. Just as I said, make sure you're really disconnecting all the power sources and just have a look at the Fusebox first. Make sure you know a little bit where every cable is going. Take photos, take notes, anything that helps you to keep in mind where every plug is going back in and every cable, and then you can pretty much do that yourself. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please give us the thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.